Richard's name flashed across my phone just as I finished reviewing the last report before leaving the office for Christmas. I smiled automatically and answered, "Hi, Dad." His voice was flat. "Vanessa, don't come to Christmas dinner." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" "Claire doesn't want you there." I sat upright. "Why?" "I don't know all the details." "You don't know, but you're telling me not to come." He sighed impatiently. "She says your being there will make everyone uncomfortable. We've already decided it's better this way." "We?" "Your mother, Ethan, everyone." I tightened my grip on the phone. What exactly did I do? "It doesn't matter now. Let's just avoid drama for one holiday." I waited for him to say he was joking. He never did. Instead, he ended the call with one final sentence. "Maybe next year." The line went dead. I stayed frozen in my office chair, staring at the silent phone. Not once had Dad asked for my side. Not once had he questioned Claire's accusation. I had simply been erased from Christmas. It shouldn't have surprised me. For years, I had quietly accepted being the extra child in our family. Whenever Ethan needed money for a business setback, I helped. When Dad struggled with paperwork after his surgery, I spent weekends organizing everything. When Mom needed rides to appointments because Ethan was too busy, I rearranged meetings without complaining. Yet somehow, whenever conflict appeared, I was always the easiest person to sacrifice. I thought about calling Ethan. Instead, I placed my phone face down. If they had already made their decision, begging for a seat at the table wouldn't change it. Christmas morning arrived unusually quiet. While families filled restaurants and airports, downtown was nearly empty. Most of my coworkers were off, but our compliance division had received an urgent assignment late the previous afternoon. A national charity had requested an immediate corporate audit after outside regulators raised concerns about financial reporting. Holiday or not, the work couldn't wait. I unlocked my office, grabbed the investigation files, and headed toward the executive conference room. According to the schedule, several members of the charity's leadership team would be attending our opening meeting. I expected strangers. I walked in first, arranged my notes, and took my seat at the head of the conference table. A minute later, laughter echoed from the hallway. The conference room door swung open. Claire walked inside beside three executives, smiling as if she owned the building. She glanced toward the head of the table. The smile disappeared instantly. Her face drained of color. "Vanessa." I stood calmly. "Good morning. I'm Vanessa Brooks, Senior Corporate Compliance Director." I looked around the room. "I'll be leading your organization's audit." Claire stumbled backward. "No." Every executive turned toward her. She pointed directly at me, her voice rising into a panicked scream. "She can't investigate us." Claire's voice echoed across the conference room. "She can't investigate us." The room went completely silent. Every executive looked from Claire to me, waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. I kept my expression neutral. "Ms. Brooks," one of the board members asked carefully, "do you know our chief financial officer?" Before Claire could answer, I nodded once. "Yes, Claire Brooks is married to my older brother." A ripple of surprise spread around the table. Claire forced an awkward laugh. "It's not really relevant." "It is relevant," I replied calmly, "which is why I'm formally disclosing our family relationship before this audit proceeds." I turned toward our firm's general counsel. "I'd like an independent conflict review under company policy." The attorney immediately made a note. "Thank you for disclosing it voluntarily, Ms. Brooks." Claire stared at me, clearly expecting me to become emotional or defensive. Instead, I organized my files while legal stepped outside to begin the review. Waiting gave me far too much time to think. Christmas wasn't the first time Claire had managed to push me aside. 2 years earlier, my birthday dinner had quietly been moved to another weekend because Claire wanted to attend a wine festival. No one bothered telling me until I showed up at the restaurant alone. The summer before that, my parents posted smiling vacation photos online. I'd never even known the trip had been planned. Every time I questioned it, Claire somehow became the injured party. "I just don't think Vanessa likes me," she'd tell everyone. Eventually, everyone stopped asking what had actually happened, including my father. Christmas had simply been the latest occasion where believing Claire was easier than listening to me. Across town, Claire wasn't waiting quietly. She stepped into the hallway and immediately called Ethan. "You have to fix this," she hissed. "Tell Vanessa to step away." Within minutes, my phone buzzed. "Vanessa," Ethan said, "this is family. Can't you let someone else handle the audit?" "No. You'd really choose work over us." "I didn't choose this situation, Ethan. Dad made sure I wasn't part of the family Christmas. Today I'm doing the job my company assigned me." "But my professional ethics don't change because we're related." I ended the call before he could argue further. Just then, the conference room door opened again. Legal returned with a written determination. "The relationship has been fully disclosed," the attorney announced. "There is no reporting conflict. Ms. Brooks will remain lead compliance director on this investigation." Claire's shoulders dropped. For the first time since entering the building, genuine fear replaced her anger. If this was only a routine audit, why was Claire so desperate to stop me from leading it? The following morning, the executive conference room felt noticeably different. The whispers stopped the moment I walked in. Every department head was already seated, along with members of the charity's board. Claire sat at the opposite end of the table, avoiding eye contact while pretending to review a stack of financial reports. I placed my binder on the table. "Good morning, everyone. Since legal has completed its conflict review, we'll begin." No one objected. Claire folded her arms. "For today's opening session," I said, "we'll review restricted grant funding, vendor payments, and internal approval procedures." The chief operating officer nodded. "Everything you requested has been prepared." I looked toward Claire. "I'll need the supporting documentation for all restricted donor grants issued during the past 18 months. Claire answered almost immediately. "Those files aren't available today." Several executives looked surprised. The COO frowned. "They should be." Claire forced a smile. "There were server issues." Before I could respond, the organization's IT director cleared his throat. "There haven't been any server outages this month." The room fell silent again. Claire slowly turned toward him. He looked genuinely confused. "All accounting records are accessible from the archive." I simply made a note. "No problem, we'll retrieve them directly." As additional files appeared on the conference room screen, several entries immediately caught my attention. Duplicate payment references. Approval dates that didn't match transaction dates. Vendor invoices approved before purchase requests even existed. None of it proved fraud, but none of it made sense either. I kept my voice even. "At this stage, I'm not making conclusions." Claire leaned forward. "So why are you treating us like criminals?" "I'm treating your records exactly the same way I would treat any organization's records." Then I addressed the room. "Effective immediately, all financial documents, emails related to grant approvals, and accounting databases are to be preserved. No files are to be altered or deleted until the audit concludes." A murmur spread around the table. One board member looked alarmed. "Is that really necessary?" "It is standard procedure whenever documentation contains material inconsistencies." Claire suddenly pushed back her chair. "This isn't about accounting." She pointed directly at me. "This is retaliation, because I asked your family not to invite you for Christmas." Several executives, exchanged uncomfortable glances. I met her stare without raising my voice. I disclosed our family relationship before this meeting began. I turned toward the general counsel. Legal independently reviewed my participation and approved it. The attorney nodded. That is correct. Claire's attempt to discredit me collapsed almost instantly. Instead, the chairman spoke up. In light of these discrepancies, we're authorizing an independent forensic accounting team to assist. Claire's face went completely pale. Outside the conference room, Ethan had just arrived after hearing rumors that the audit was expanding. For the first time, he wasn't wondering whether I was overreacting. He was beginning to wonder whether Claire had lied to all of us. At that exact moment, the lead forensic accountant walked into the room carrying a laptop. He looked directly at me. Ms. Brooks. He lowered his voice. We've found something you need to see immediately. The forensic accountant closed the conference room door behind him and placed his laptop on the table. I didn't want to discuss this in front of everyone. He rotated the screen toward me. A spreadsheet filled the display. Rows of payments. Vendor names. Approval numbers. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. Then he highlighted several transactions. Notice the amounts. I leaned closer. Every payment was just below the organization's approval threshold. $24,800, $24,900, $24,950. He nodded. Large expenditures should have required board approval. Instead, someone repeatedly divided them into smaller payments. So they avoided oversight. Exactly. I continued reading. The same electronic approval appeared again and again. Claire Brooks. Within the hour, our team began matching payment records against supporting documentation. The inconsistencies multiplied. Several invoices had been approved before purchase requests even existed. Vendor contracts carried signatures dated weeks after money had already been transferred. One accounting manager looked genuinely stunned. How did we never notice this? The forensic accountant answered quietly. Because the records were designed to look routine. No one spoke after that. Another analyst entered carrying a printed report. We recovered metadata from the accounting server. He handed it to me. Multiple financial records had been edited just days before regulators announced the mandatory audit. The edits all traced back to Claire's executive account. That timing wasn't accidental. Someone had known outside scrutiny was coming. Then another discovery changed everything. Our digital investigations team recovered archived emails that Claire believed had been permanently deleted. One subject line immediately caught my attention. Potential compliance assignment. Inside the thread, Claire discussed industry rumors that my firm's compliance division was likely to receive the charity's audit contract months before Christmas. Another message stopped me cold. If Vanessa ends up anywhere near this audit, we need to keep her away until everything is finished. I sat back in my chair. Christmas. The phone call from Dad. Being removed from the guest list. It had never been about family harmony. Keeping me away had been part of Claire's plan. She hadn't wanted casual holiday conversations about work. She hadn't wanted me asking innocent questions. Most of all, she hadn't expected me to become the person leading the investigation. Following company protocol, I contacted the appropriate regulatory authority. Within an hour, formal notices were issued. Claire was immediately suspended, pending investigation. Word spread through the building quickly. Employees gathered in quiet clusters outside conference rooms, trying to understand how an ordinary compliance review had escalated so quickly. Then the elevators opened. Dad and Ethan stepped onto the executive floor. Claire must have called them. Dad walked directly toward me. There has to be some misunderstanding. Before I could answer, the lead investigator approached. There isn't. He calmly explained the evidence already collected. The altered approvals, the split transactions, the recovered emails, the deleted financial records. Dad's confidence faded with every sentence. He slowly looked at me. For the first time in years, he seemed to realize that he'd dismissed his own daughter without ever asking for the truth. Claire wasn't finished fighting. This isn't my fault, she snapped. My accounting managers handled those payments. One of the managers immediately shook his head. Every exception required your approval. Silence. Then Ethan asked investigators if he could see the recovered emails. Minutes later, he lowered the printed pages. His hands were shaking. One message after another showed Claire deliberately portraying me as jealous, resentful, and difficult, long before any Christmas invitation was ever discussed. Years of family division suddenly made horrifying sense. Claire had been manufacturing it. She turned toward the exit. I don't have to stay here. She took 2 quick steps. Before she reached the conference room door, 2 investigators intercepted her. Mrs. Brooks, one of them said evenly, "We need you to remain in the building for formal questioning." Claire stopped in her tracks. For the first time since she'd walked into my office, she realized she wasn't walking out on her own terms. The investigation continued for several weeks. By the time it ended, every question that had started on Christmas Eve had an answer. Claire hadn't made a few careless accounting mistakes. She had built a system. Investigators proved she repeatedly split large expenditures into smaller payments to avoid board approval. Restricted donor funds had been redirected through carefully selected vendors, while approval logs were altered to make every transaction appear legitimate. The forensic team recovered deleted emails, document histories, and financial records that matched the payment trail perfectly. There was no single piece of evidence. There were hundreds. The final report left no room for doubt. One section of the report stayed with me more than any other. Months before Christmas, Claire had learned through industry contacts that my firm's compliance division was among the leading candidates to conduct the audit. She didn't know who would eventually be assigned, but she knew there was a chance it could be me. That's when everything suddenly made sense. The family arguments, the subtle distancing, the stories she'd told about me being difficult, and finally, the phone call from my father telling me not to come to Christmas dinner. She hadn't excluded me because she wanted a peaceful holiday. She had excluded me because she wanted me as far away from her as possible. Ironically, that decision guaranteed I spent Christmas morning exactly where I needed to be, leading the investigation that exposed her. When the findings became official, the charity's board voted unanimously to terminate Claire's employment. State regulators opened a criminal fraud investigation. Civil recovery proceedings began to reclaim the diverted funds. The organization immediately implemented stronger financial controls, mandatory approval oversight, and independent auditing procedures to restore donor confidence. Employees who had unknowingly worked under Claire's direction cooperated fully with investigators. The charity survived. Its reputation slowly began to recover. Dad asked if he could see me a few days after the board released its final report. We met at a quiet coffee shop. He looked older than I remembered. He wrapped both hands around his untouched cup before speaking. "I owe you an apology." I said nothing. I believed her every time. His voice cracked. "I never once asked what your side was." He looked down. "When I called and told you not to come for Christmas," he swallowed hard, "I didn't even realize what I was doing to you." "You chose the easier conversation," I said quietly. He nodded. "I did. And I was the one who paid for it." He couldn't argue. Because it was true. Ethan asked to meet separately. He placed a folder on the table between us. Inside were printed copies of Claire's emails. I read every one. His eyes were red. She convinced me you hated us. He shook his head. I should have talked to you instead of believing her. For years, I answered. For years. A few months later, Ethan filed for divorce. It wasn't because of one email or one investigation. It was because he finally understood how much of his life had been built on manipulation. As for me, my company recognized the investigation as one of the most professionally handled compliance cases of the year. Several board members from the charity personally thanked me for refusing to let family pressure influence my judgment. The promotion that followed wasn't the most meaningful reward. The peace was. For the first time in years, I stopped chasing acceptance from people who only valued me when it was convenient. The following Christmas, I spent the holiday with close friends and colleagues who had become the family I chose. A week before Christmas, Dad called again. This time, he didn't assume anything. Would you have time for coffee before the holidays? Not Christmas dinner. Not expectations. Just coffee. I can do coffee, I answered. It wasn't forgiveness. It was accountability taking its first honest step. As I walked into that cafe, I realized something I wish I'd understood years earlier. Being left off my family's Christmas guest list felt like the greatest rejection of my life. Instead, it became the decision that uncovered the truth, restored my self-respect, and reminded me that the people who deserve a place in your life are the ones who never ask you to earn it.